Hello everyone, welcome to the channel Ontario Law and the Older Person, and this video is going to be Ageism in Employment on the Job, Part 1. And so getting away from hiring, not really talking about benefits or accommodation or retiring in this video. We're just trying to explore a little bit about how older people are treated on the day-to-day basis. The warning: the information provided in this video is not legal advice. It is relayed for the purposes of general information. No legal decisions should be made based on this material. Any viewer who needs legal advice should contact a lawyer. Issues that can come up with an older person: access to training. Are older people being denied access to training? So now they're not learning the latest software, for example. And then can this be used as a reason to fire someone, right? They no longer have the skill set that's necessary. Access to promotions. Are younger people being favored over older people? Again, maybe access to training is part of that issue. And then are older workers being subjected to excessive supervision? Is someone in management really watching this older person, hoping to see them fail and then have a reason to fire them? And of course, if you're under excessive supervision, you're not going to be at your best. You're going to be stressed out about being watched all the time. So again, we're going to the Human Rights Code. And again, we're going to Section 5, and I'm going to refer to this section in any video where we're talking about employment. So, sorry. Subsection 1. Every person has a right to equal treatment with respect to employment without discrimination because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, record of offenses, marital status, family status, or disability. This is just what the statute says. I'm not advising you to do anything. If you feel you are suffering this kind of discrimination, you need to talk to a lawyer. And then subsection 2. Every person who is an employee has a right to freedom from harassment in the workplace by the employer or agent of the employer or by another employee because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, record of offenses, marital status, family status, or disability. Section 11, subsection 1, a right of a person under Part 1 is infringed where a requirement, qualification, or factor exists that is not discrimination on a prohibitive ground, but that results in the exclusion, restriction, or preference of a group of persons who are identified by a prohibited ground of discrimination and of whom the person is a member, except where. So again, you could create what might be seen as a neutral policy. On this policy, it applies to everyone in the work environment. But what if, because of the nature of that policy, a certain group that are, under a certain ground, they face harsher consequences or a more difficult experience? So again, this isn't the intent of shutting people out, but it might be the effect. A, the requirement, qualification, or factor is reasonable and bona fide in the circumstances. So it's basically necessary for this to function. B, it is declared in this act, other than in Section 17, that to discriminate because of such ground is not an infringement of a right. So we're not going to Section 17, just pointing out again that a right might be protected in one part of the statute, but not another. Subsection 2, the tribunal or a court shall not find that a requirement, qualification, or factor is reasonable and bona fide in the circumstances unless it is satisfied that the needs of the group of which the person is a member cannot be accommodated without undue hardship on the person responsible for accommodating those needs, considering the cost, outside sources of funding, if any, and health and safety requirements, if any. Every time I bring up this subsection, I address a different kind of issue. So in this case, health and safety requirements, if any. So what if accommodating one employee will endanger the health and safety of another employee? So for example, there are certain jobs that are more dangerous than others, but we might have a clash of rights here. The person who deserves accommodation versus other employees who deserve to work in an environment that's as safe as possible given the occupation. So we have the website of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and we're looking at employment. Subject to bona fide requirements, denying or restricting employment opportunities or treating a worker differently because of age is a violation of the code. Examples of unequal treatment because of age include, but are not limited to, limiting or withholding employment opportunities, including transfer, promotion, and training opportunities. Not assigning an older worker to certain tasks or projects, or subjecting an older worker to an unwanted transfer because of age. Continuing with that list, performance managing older workers in a different way than other workers. This includes subjecting an older worker's performance to a higher level of scrutiny, but also failing to performance manager because of a perception that the older worker's performance is linked to age, or because of a belief that performance management is not necessary as the person will soon be retiring. Not recalling someone from layoff because of age, terminating someone's employment because of age. Of course, employers are not precluded from terminating older workers using the same performance management criteria as for other workers where there are legitimate performance concerns that are based on objective evidence about the employee's ability to perform the duties of the job. This isn't something I'm going to expand a lot on in this video. I will in other videos, but there are some people who feel older workers shouldn't be held to the same criteria as a form of accommodation. Maybe they need more time to do things. Maybe they should have lower targets. So, what do you think of that? Should older people be held to the same standards? Should there be accommodation? Or is even the idea that they can't maintain the same standards ageist? Going back to the government report, consultations on the social and economic impacts of ageism in Canada, what we heard report, link is in the description. Here we have a paragraph from that report. Respondents provided many examples of the ageist behaviors and attitudes of coworkers and managers that make older workers feel unwelcome in the workplace. Respondents reported older workers are commonly subjected to ageist attitudes and disrespect by coworkers and managers. For example, name calling, jokes about older workers, assumptions about abilities and competence. Respondents also reported feeling ignored or excluded by their colleagues, both in the workplace during projects and meetings, as well as socially outside of the workplace. Some respondents reported the knowledge and experience of older workers is overlooked or viewed as out of date. I just want to touch on one issue here. Excluded from social events outside the workplace. Why is that considered a factor here? Who people choose to socialize outside of the workplace should be totally up to them. So, should people be expected to bring in those of different groups just because they belong to those different groups when we're talking about social time? We've looked at this chart before, so the majority of participants, their primary concern about ageism in employment is the hiring process and then being laid off or forced to retire. And then they list the kinds of abuse on the job. So attitudes or beliefs about older workers held by employers or managers, older workers being disrespected or excluded in the workplace, societal beliefs that older workers take away jobs or promotion opportunities from younger workers, which we looked at a bit in a different video, societal beliefs that older workers should retire at the age of 65, ageist attitudes or beliefs about older workers held by coworkers, because it's also coworkers who need to meet certain standards. And so the idea being, maybe management needs to step up to make sure coworkers are not acting in this way. Company policies or practices that discriminate against older workers, and ageist attitudes or beliefs about older workers held by self. So this is something I kind of rose in a different video. How is ageist attitudes about oneself a form of discrimination in the workplace? It's someone else's attitude about themselves. It's not coming from the boss. It's not coming from other employees. Should this even be on the list? I'm kind of thinking not. From a different source, a article from 2022, the link is in the description, testing the shielding effect of intergenerational contact against ageism in the workplace, a Canadian study. Not going to spend much time on this, just to raise a couple points. This is a direct quote. Data were collected from 603 Canadian workers aged 18 to 68 years old from private and public organizations using an online survey measuring concepts under study. Results of a path analysis suggest that intergroup contacts and knowledge sharing practices are associated with positive attitudes about older workers. More so, positive attitudes about older workers generate higher levels of work engagement, which in turn are associated with stronger intentions to remain with the organization. However, positive attitudes about older workers had no effect on intentions to remain in the workplace. Results are discussed in light of the intergroup contact theory. And we're not going to go into that theory, but we seem to have a conflict here. Positive attitudes about older workers had no effect on intentions to remain in the workplace. We have some contradiction there right in that paragraph. That's a bit problematic, but finding information about this can be a little difficult, so I have to take what I can get. Anyways, I would like more information about the sample because all we know is that it's a broad range here. It's not focusing on older people. How many people are considered younger people versus older people, and what kind of aspects to their characteristics do they have, gender, ethnicity, stuff like that. So I would like a lot more information about who they're talking to. A scoping review conducted by Harris et al. Summarized the most common ageist stereotypes conveyed by employers toward older workers. Now they go into positive stereotypes, so not ageism, so interesting shift there in topic. But anyways, positive stereotypes include perceptions that older workers, defined as workers aged 50 years old or more in this paper, possess soft skills and are loyal and reliable employees. Notwithstanding these qualities, older workers are negatively portrayed as being less capable of adapting to change, especially to new technologies, less capable of learning, less competent, and having decreased performance activity. In other words, the skills of multitasking and fast learning that many employers value in modern work environments are associated mainly with younger workers. Another paragraph. Studies have documented older workers' reactions to such characterizations and the negative psychosocial outcomes resulting from the perception of being the target of ageist stereotypes by employers. For example, older workers confronted with negative age based stereotypes have higher levels of stress and lower effective commitment to their organization. Go on to the next slide with the same paragraph. Along the same lines, in a Canadian study conducted among older healthcare workers, Lagasse, don't know how to say that name, and Al have shown that the perception of ageist attitudes on the part of employers as well as colleagues lead to psychological disengagement from the workplace, which in turn negatively impacts self-esteem. In a Belgian study, Gaillard and Desmet, have also shown that exposure to negative age-based stereotypes reinforce older workers' intentions to retire early. Finally, ageism in the workplace is associated with a lower quality of life. I think this might be a good time to just talk a little bit about intersectionality when it comes to looking at this kind of research. It's something I've mentioned in a different video. I'm going to dedicate at least one video entirely to intersectionality, but something to be considering as we go through various subjects about older people and their experiences. So again, this is the website, the Ontario Human Rights Commission website. Link is in the description, an introduction to the intersectional approach. A paragraph from that website. The concept of intersectionality has been defined as intersectional oppression that arises out of the combination of various oppressions which together produce something unique and distinct from any one form of discrimination standing alone. An intersectional approach takes into account the historical, social, and political context and recognizes the unique experience of the individual based on the intersection of all relevant grounds. This approach allows the particular experience of discrimination based on the confluence of grounds involved to be acknowledged and remedied. Okay, that's language is a bit dense, but basically no individual belongs to any one group and only that group. So we all have different aspects of our identities that fall under different grounds under, say, the Charter or the Human Rights Code. And so this is a example I've used in the past. A cisgendered heterosexual white woman will have a different experience than a LGBTQ Black man because we all belong to different groups and they come together in different ways. Another paragraph, persons with disabilities may experience particular barriers when they identify by other grounds. For example, during the Commission's consultations on age discrimination, the Commission was told that for persons with disabilities, aging can result in a disproportionate impact or unique experiences of discrimination. Indeed, statistical evidence confirms the particular disadvantages faced by older persons with disabilities. And it's hard to find that research, especially trying to find recent research. This website had a list of persons with different kinds of aspects to their identities, and this is the only one that mentioned age, and even then, age is like a secondary characteristic. Doing research on this issue, age is often not one of the factors that are focused on. So I found a research paper. I was very happy. It was recent. I thought it was going to be about the experiences of older LGBTQ workers. Unfortunately, it wasn't great. It had a tiny sample, like 48 people maybe, and almost all of them by far were cisgendered heterosexual people. So why are they even in this study? And then the few statements, if you will, or quotes from people who were LGBTQ, they were focusing on just one aspect of their identity. So maybe they're talking about being LGBTQ in the workplace or being an older worker in the workplace or having a disability. So I didn't find that study very useful. I found an American study and I prefer Canadian content. I think it's more relevant. I'm grasping at straws. Uh, what I found problematic is so they were talking about different older people who have different other kinds of characteristics. And let me just say that the group out of that larger group was a group that had, let's say, more privileged characteristics other than age, and yet we're saying that they, unlike all the other groups, were the most acceptable target for various kinds of bigotry, and not a result I can really wrap my head around as being valid. The writers of the study, the research papers, seem to think that this was a valid result. So maybe I can't accept it because I just don't like it, or maybe it's not acceptable given maybe the biases or other issues that the researchers themselves might have. But so we are. Here we are. If you can give me a link to some research that's recent about older people with other kinds of characteristics, their experiences in the workplace, leave it in a comment. I'd be happy to follow up on that. However, I did find a little bit of information about this kind of issue. It is online, an article from the Canadian Press, Employment Ageism Affecting Workers Over 45. So here we get, again, we have a fairly low age for what is older. IDQ report finds. It's from October 2025. The article does touch a little bit on experiences that might be unique to women. So women can face many challenges throughout their careers, which could affect their motivation to stay in the labor market. In fact, 34% of women aged 45 and over say they plan to leave the workforce before the age of 60, compared to 22% of men. The large proportion of women working in the health and education sectors explains this gap, among other factors, with the retirement age aligned with the terms of public sector pension plans. A little more detail would be interesting. We don't get it from this report. Work-life balance can also be difficult for women in their 40s and 50s, paired with the trend of having children later. That means more of them have to care for young children and aging parents while also working. So maybe that's why they retire earlier. They're just tired. Women with less education are also more likely to find themselves in precarious situations. After age 55, 32% of women workers are considered to be holding precarious jobs compared to 23% of men of the same age. Held back by the class ceiling, yes, which still exists, Women professionals may also lose their drive earlier if they don't have opportunities for advancement, according to Braham. Hope I'm saying that correctly. Although they represent 46% of workers aged 45 and older, women occupy only 34% of management positions in this age group. There may also be disappointed hopes that make us a little less committed or a little less interested in continuing. So, this is kind of a double dose, if you will. They feel kind of locked out because of ageism, so not feeling as engaged. And then women in particular, again, locked out in certain ways, and therefore it's less likely that they're going to be able to be engaged. I decided to look for a good definition of precarious work. So this is from the website of Credit Counseling Canada. The link is in the description, and this is what they have to say. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives reports that more than 1 in 5 Canadian professionals are employed in a precarious job. Precarious employment could mean no benefits, medical coverage, sick days, and also the inability to be part of a union. Essentially, these workers are filling permanent positions but are denied permanent employee rights. This creates uncertainty for the employee and contributes to the emotional and financial stress of the family. Just like high blood pressure and stress, chronic job insecurity has a negative effect on a person's overall health. The same website also has this bit. Precarious jobs are associated with part-time or self-employment. They also include contract or fixed-term work and seasonal employment or temporary and on-call positions such as home-based workers and telecommuting. A full-time position on the employer's premises for a decent wage could still be considered precarious employment if there is a fear of relocation layoff or company shutdown. And in other videos, we talked about the fact that income has a very strong connection to health, but also the idea of social isolation. People can't participate as much. Uh, they're spending a lot more time alone. And then, of course, loneliness can also be connected to serious health repercussions. So that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching to the end. Have a great day.